Sometimes the greatest mistake a king can make is believing destiny will wait for him. The great hall of Blackwood Palace shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as nobles, elders, and warriors gathered beneath banners stitched with silver wolves and midnight blue silk. Every eye followed Alpha King Kieran Blackwood as he stood before the sacred moon altar, his expression carved from stone, his silver eyes unreadable despite the whispers rippling through the crowd. Across from him stood Emily Carter, her simple ivory dress untouched by jewels, her hands trembling only enough for the nearest elder to notice. She had never dreamed of standing inside the royal palace, much less before the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. Yet the moon goddess had chosen her, binding their scents together beneath the last full moon. The kingdom expected celebration. Instead, silence settled over the hall like winter frost. Kieran lifted his chin, his voice calm enough to sound merciful even as it shattered everything. "Emily Carter, I reject this bond." The words echoed against ancient stone walls before disappearing into stunned silence. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. Her heartbeat stumbled, not from anger but from disbelief. She searched his face for hesitation, for regret, for anything that suggested this was some cruel misunderstanding. There was nothing. Around her, nobles lowered their voices into quiet murmurs while servants avoided her eyes. No one stepped forward. No one questioned the king. Emily straightened her shoulders, refusing to let tears become another spectacle for strangers. If dignity was all she had left, she would protect it. She lowered her head just once. "I accept your decision, Your Majesty." Without another word, she turned away from the altar, every step feeling heavier than the last as the enormous palace doors slowly opened before her. Outside, a cold spring rain had begun to fall, washing silver across the stone pathways leading into the forest beyond the castle grounds. Emily kept walking until the palace disappeared behind towering pines, the distant bells fading beneath the steady rhythm of rain striking the earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to quiet the ache spreading through her chest, telling herself that tomorrow she would find somewhere new to begin again. But destiny had already begun writing another chapter. A sudden wave of dizziness forced her to stop beside an ancient oak. Her breathing grew uneven as she pressed one trembling hand against her stomach, confused by a warmth she had never felt before. It lasted only a heartbeat, gentle as a whispered promise, yet unmistakably alive. Emily closed her eyes, unaware that beneath her palm, another tiny heartbeat had already begun, carrying the blood of the very king who had just walked away from them both. Emily remained beneath the ancient oak until the rain softened into a gentle mist, her breathing finally steady enough to continue. She told herself the strange warmth had only been exhaustion after an impossible day, yet every few steps her hand drifted back to her stomach as though some quiet instinct refused to let go. By nightfall she reached the edge of a small mountain village where warm lanterns glowed behind cottage windows, and wood smoke drifted through the cool air. The place was far enough from Blackwood Palace that few people would recognize the woman the Alpha King had rejected only hours before. She found shelter inside the modest home of Eleanor Brooks, an elderly healer whose reputation for kindness had spread across the northern valleys for decades. Eleanor welcomed the soaked stranger without asking questions, wrapping a wool blanket around Emily's shoulders before placing a steaming cup of herbal tea into her hands. For the first time since leaving the palace, Emily felt safe enough to cry. She did not cry because she had lost a crown she never wanted. She cried because she had believed the moon goddess had finally chosen a place where she belonged, only to watch that dream disappear with a single sentence. Eleanor listened quietly, never interrupting, allowing the silence itself to become a comfort. The following morning, Emily awoke feeling unusually weak. Even the smell of fresh bread made her stomach uneasy. Eleanor noticed the change immediately. Years of caring for families had sharpened her instincts beyond anything written in medical books. She gently checked Emily's pulse, asked a few careful questions, then smiled with surprising tenderness. Emily frowned, confused by the expression. Eleanor rested one weathered hand over Emily's trembling fingers. "My dear," she said softly, "you are not alone." The words settled into the room before their meaning reached Emily's heart. Her eyes widened. She shook her head once, unable to believe what she had heard. Eleanor nodded with quiet certainty. "You are going to have a baby." Time seemed to stop. Emily stared through the small window where morning sunlight painted the wildflowers outside in shades of gold. A child. The thought filled her with fear before it filled her with hope. The baby's father would never know. The kingdom would never understand. If anyone discovered the child carried the blood of the Alpha King, whispers would follow them wherever they went. Emily lowered her gaze until tears slipped silently onto her folded hands. Eleanor squeezed them gently. "You still have a choice," she whispered. Emily closed her eyes and placed both hands over the tiny life growing inside her. She remembered the loneliness she had carried while walking away from the palace, the emptiness left by rejection, and then she imagined another innocent heart forced to carry the same pain. Her answer came without hesitation. "This child will never wonder if they were wanted," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Even if I have to build an entirely new life, my son or daughter will always know they are loved." Eleanor smiled through glistening eyes. Within 3 days, Emily quietly sold the last piece of jewelry she owned, purchased a small wagon, and prepared to travel west toward a peaceful farming community where no one knew her name. She left behind the palace, the broken bond, and every memory that begged her to look back. Hidden beneath her cloak, one hand rested protectively over the gentle promise growing inside her, while the first light of dawn stretched across the open road, carrying a future that neither she nor the Alpha King could yet imagine. 4 years passed like changing seasons across the quiet farming valley where Emily Carter had built a life with nothing except determination, honest work, and an unbreakable promise. The little cottage she rented sat beside a clear stream bordered by towering maple trees whose leaves painted the hills gold every fall. It was not a palace, but every corner of the home echoed with laughter, warmth, and hope. Her son, Noah Carter, had become the light that greeted every sunrise. He possessed soft brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, yet his remarkable silver eyes never failed to catch the attention of strangers. They shimmered whenever sunlight reached them, carrying a quiet mystery that Emily noticed more with every passing year. Whenever curious neighbors asked where Noah had inherited such unusual eyes, Emily simply smiled and answered that children often carried gifts no one could explain. Noah grew into an unusually gentle little boy. He greeted every animal as though it were an old friend, carefully rescuing injured birds, comforting frightened lambs during storms, and sitting for hours beside elderly neighbors who simply needed someone willing to listen. Eleanor Brooks often watched him from her garden with quiet amazement. "Kindness is inherited just as surely as strength," she would whisper, though she never explained exactly what she meant. There were moments, however, that reminded Emily her son was unlike any other child in the valley. One afternoon, a frightened horse broke free from its harness, racing through the village square while people hurried out of its path. Before anyone could react, Noah calmly stepped forward and raised one small hand. The frightened animal slowed almost immediately, lowering its head until the little boy gently stroked its nose. The villagers stared in disbelief before praising Noah's remarkable gift with animals. Emily smiled politely, but deep inside, uneasiness settled into her heart. She remembered stories told about powerful alpha bloodlines possessing an almost instinctive connection with wolves and creatures of the wild. That evening, after Noah had fallen asleep beside the fireplace with a storybook resting across his lap, Emily sat quietly outside beneath a sky filled with stars. Eleanor joined her with 2 cups of warm tea. Neither woman spoke for several minutes. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "He is growing stronger every year." Emily nodded without taking her eyes from the moon. "I know. One day he will ask about his father." Emily closed her eyes. She had rehearsed that conversation hundreds of times inside her mind, yet every version ended with the same uncertainty. She never wanted Noah to believe he had been abandoned because he was unworthy of love. She wanted him to understand that adults sometimes make painful mistakes, and those mistakes should never become a child's burden. The following morning, Noah ran across the meadow carrying a handful of wildflowers he had gathered for his mother. "These reminded me of your smile," he said proudly as he placed them into her hands. Emily hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of fresh grass and spring air, silently thanking fate for every ordinary moment they shared. She did not notice the royal riders traveling the northern highways many miles away, nor did she know that within the walls of Blackwood Palace, the invisible bond that had once been rejected had never completely disappeared. Destiny had remained patient, quietly waiting for the day when one little boy with silver eyes would unknowingly change an entire kingdom. Far beyond the peaceful valley where Emily and Noah had quietly built their new life, Blackwood Palace stood stronger than ever beneath towering stone walls and silver banners that danced in the northern wind. Alpha King Kieran Blackwood had become a ruler admired for his wisdom, discipline, and unwavering devotion to his people. Trade flourished, neighboring pacts honored their alliances, and every council meeting ended with another victory for the kingdom. Yet when the grand halls emptied each evening and the palace fell silent, success brought him no comfort. Every night the same dream returned. He saw a young woman standing beneath moonlight in a simple ivory dress, her eyes filled not with anger but with quiet disappointment. He would reach toward her, desperate to speak words that never came, only to watch her disappear into a curtain of rain before he could take another step. Kieran always woke before sunrise with the same unfamiliar ache pressing against his chest. The royal physicians found nothing wrong. The palace elders blamed the lingering echo of a broken mate bond. His closest advisor suggested it was simply the burden of leadership. Kieran accepted every explanation except the one his own heart whispered whenever he stood alone beneath the moon. For years earlier, he had convinced himself rejecting Emily Carter had been the only responsible choice. Political alliances demanded a queen from one of the great alpha bloodlines, not an ordinary young woman with no powerful family standing behind her. He had believed duty required sacrifice. Instead, the sacrifice had quietly become his own peace. During the annual Moon Council, influential elders once again encouraged him to choose a royal bride. Noble daughters from respected pacts had traveled hundreds of miles hoping for an audience with the Alpha King. Each carried impressive family histories, graceful manners, and every quality expected of a future queen. Kieran greeted each candidate with courtesy, yet every conversation ended the same way. Something always felt incomplete, as though an invisible part of his life remained somewhere beyond the palace walls. After the gathering ended, the oldest elder approached him with unusual concern. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "some bonds do not disappear simply because one heart refuses to acknowledge them." Kieran looked toward the palace balcony where the full moon hung above the distant mountains. "The bond was broken," he answered quietly. The elder lowered his eyes. Perhaps only the words were spoken. Destiny has a way of finishing conversations that people abandon too early. Those words followed Kieran long after the meeting ended. Later that evening he wandered into the royal gardens where white roses bloomed beneath soft lantern light. Without understanding why, he paused beside a single empty stone bench overlooking the forest. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the air, stirring a memory so vivid that he instinctively closed his eyes. For one impossible moment he could almost hear Emily laughing somewhere beyond the trees. When he opened his eyes, the garden stood empty. He told himself it was only memory. Yet deep within him, something long forgotten had quietly begun to awaken. While many miles away, a little boy with silver eyes gazed at the very same moon, unaware that fate was already guiding both of their paths toward the moment neither of them could escape. The Harvest Moon Festival arrived with music that drifted across rolling hills and colorful ribbons, dancing between rows of maple trees. Families traveled from neighboring villages carrying homemade pies, fresh apples, carved wooden toys, and baskets filled with autumn flowers. Emily almost decided to stay home. Crowds reminded her too much of another gathering years ago, another day when her life had changed forever. But Noah had spent weeks talking excitedly about the festival after hearing stories from his friends. She could never deny him simple childhood memories because of her own past. Holding his small hand, she smiled as they entered the cheerful town square. Noah's eyes sparkled with wonder as musicians played lively melodies while children laughed beside pumpkin displays and friendly market stalls. For a few precious hours, Emily allowed herself to believe they were simply another happy family among many. Far to the north, Alpha King Kieran Blackwood had chosen to attend the festival without royal ceremony, hoping to understand the lives of ordinary people beyond palace walls. Accompanied by only a handful of trusted guards dressed in plain traveling cloaks, he walked through the celebration unnoticed by most visitors. He greeted merchants, accepted warm bread from grateful bakers, and listened as farmers proudly described another successful harvest. His people smiled easily around him, yet the strange emptiness inside him remained. Then a sudden commotion drew everyone's attention toward the edge of the marketplace. A frightened wolf pup, no older than a few months, had become tangled beneath a broken wooden cart. The little creature whimpered softly, too frightened to move, while curious onlookers hesitated, uncertain how to help without making matters worse. Before anyone else stepped forward, Noah slipped gently through the gathering crowd. Emily instinctively called his name, but her son simply knelt beside the trembling pup with remarkable calm. "It is all right," he whispered. "Nobody is going to hurt you." The frightened animal stopped struggling almost immediately. Noah carefully lifted the loose wooden beam just enough for the tiny wolf to crawl free before wrapping it inside his own small jacket. The pup licked his hand and rested peacefully against his chest as though it had known him forever. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Even experienced wolf handlers exchanged puzzled glances. Kieran watched every second without understanding why his heart suddenly raced. The little boy looked ordinary enough, yet something about him felt deeply familiar. It was not merely the unusual silver eyes that reflected the afternoon sunlight. It was the calm presence surrounding the child, a quiet strength that stirred instincts Kieran had never questioned before. Without thinking, he took one slow step closer. Noah looked up, meeting the stranger's silver gaze without fear. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of them spoke. An invisible warmth passed between them, gentle yet unmistakable, leaving Kieran strangely breathless. Noah smiled with innocent kindness. "He is safe now," the little boy said, stroking the wolf pup gently. Kieran nodded almost automatically, unable to explain why those simple words settled so deeply within him. Standing several yards away, Emily finally caught sight of the tall stranger through the crowd. The moment her eyes met his, every color seemed to drain from the world around her. After 4 long years, destiny had quietly brought them together again, and neither of them realized that the smallest person standing between them carried the answer to every question the Alpha King had been asking beneath the moon. Emily's heart nearly stopped as she recognized the familiar silver eyes across the marketplace. Instinct took over before thought could catch up. She hurried toward Noah, her footsteps quick but controlled, refusing to let fear show on her face. Noah looked back with his usual bright smile, still holding the rescued wolf pup carefully in his arms. "Mom, look," he said happily. "He was scared, but he trusted me." Emily knelt beside her son and gently brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead. "You did the right thing," she whispered, although her voice carried a tremble she could not completely hide. Kieran remained only a few feet away, studying the little boy with quiet curiosity. There was something impossible to ignore about him. It was not simply the silver eyes or the calm confidence that seemed unusual for a child so young. The invisible pull inside his heart had grown stronger with every passing second. Before he could speak, another voice interrupted the silence. "Your Majesty." An elderly man stepped through the gathering crowd, leaning upon an elegantly carved wooden cane. It was Elder Nathaniel Hayes, one of the oldest spiritual advisors in the Northern Territories, respected for his extraordinary understanding of ancient bloodlines and moon goddess traditions. He had traveled to the festival as an honored guest and now stood completely still, his weathered eyes fixed upon Noah. The elder's expression slowly shifted from curiosity to astonishment. He looked first at the little boy, then toward Kieran, then back again. The cheerful conversations around the square gradually faded as people noticed the unusual tension. "Is something wrong?" Emily asked quietly, instinctively placing one protective hand on Noah's shoulder. Elder Nathaniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer until he stood directly before the child. Noah looked up politely, offering the rescued wolf pup for the elder to pet. The old man smiled gently before his gaze returned to those unmistakable silver eyes. "Young man," he asked softly, "what is your name?" "My name is Noah Carter, sir." The elder repeated the name under his breath as though searching through decades of forgotten memories. Then he slowly turned toward the Alpha King. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice calm enough to carry across the silent square. "There is only one royal bloodline in all the Northern Territories blessed with eyes that shine exactly like this beneath the autumn sun." A ripple of surprise swept through the crowd. Kieran's expression remained composed, but his heartbeat became impossible to ignore. Emily felt every muscle in her body tighten. She had imagined this moment countless times during lonely nights, yet nothing had prepared her for destiny arriving so suddenly. Noah looked from one adult to another, confused by the silence surrounding him. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Emily immediately gathered him into a gentle embrace. "No," she answered, forcing a reassuring smile. "You have done nothing wrong." Elder Nathaniel lowered his voice, but the quiet certainty within his words reached everyone standing nearby. "Some truths can hide for years," he said, never taking his eyes from Kieran. "But blood remembers what people try to forget." At that exact moment, Kieran looked into Noah's silver eyes once more, and for the first time in 4 years, the invisible emptiness inside his heart suddenly felt as though it had found the piece that had been missing all along. The festival no longer sounded like a celebration. Music still drifted across the square. Children still laughed somewhere beyond the crowd. Yet around Emily, Noah, and Kieran, the world had become strangely quiet. Emily understood that silence better than anyone. She had spent 4 years preparing herself for this possibility, hoping it would never come, yet knowing destiny rarely stayed hidden forever. Noah looked up at her with innocent confusion, still holding the little wolf pup that had now fallen peacefully asleep in his arms. "Mom," he asked softly, "why is everyone looking at us?" Emily gently squeezed his shoulder. "Because sometimes people are surprised by things they do not expect." Kieran took one careful step forward. His voice remained calm, but there was an uncertainty no one had ever heard from the Alpha King before. "Emily." Hearing her name spoken by him after so many years stirred memories she had worked hard to bury. She met his eyes without anger and without warmth. "Your Majesty." The formal greeting created a distance greater than the 4 years that separated them. Kieran searched her face, noticing the quiet confidence that had replaced the frightened young woman who had once stood before the moon altar. She had changed. So had he. But one question outweighed every other thought. His gaze slowly settled on Noah. "Is he?" The words refused to come. Emily looked down at her son before answering. "Noah, would you mind taking the little wolf over to Mrs. Harper's stand? She has fresh water for him." Noah smiled and nodded, trusting his mother completely. "I will be right back." He hurried away, carefully protecting the tiny animal in his arms. Emily waited until he was out of hearing distance before looking back at Kieran. There was no anger in her expression, only honesty. "Yes," she said quietly. "He is your son." The words settled over the square like the first snowfall of winter. No one spoke. Elder Nathaniel simply lowered his head, as though acknowledging a truth he had already recognized. Kieran stood completely still. His eyes never left Emily's face. "Why did you never tell me?" he whispered. Emily did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him. That hurt him far more than anger ever could. "The day you rejected me," she replied gently, "I did not know I was carrying him. By the time I learned the truth, I remembered exactly how easily you had walked away. I refused to let my child grow up believing he had to earn someone's love." Kieran closed his eyes for a brief moment. Every lonely night, every unexplained ache, every dream that had haunted him suddenly made sense. Emily continued quietly. "Noah has never gone to bed wondering whether he was wanted. I made certain of that every single day." The Alpha King looked toward the little boy laughing as he offered water to the rescued wolf pup. Noah smiled so easily, completely unaware that his world had just changed forever. Kieran felt something inside him break, not from rejection, but from the realization that while Emily had spent 4 years giving their son everything he needed, he had spent those same years not even knowing the child existed. For the first time since becoming king, Kieran understood that the greatest crown he had ever lost had never rested upon a throne. It had been waiting for him in the gentle smile of a little boy who had just called someone else his whole world. Noah returned with the tiny wolf pup asleep against his shoulder, smiling as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "Mrs. Harper says he is going to be just fine," he announced proudly. Emily knelt to straighten his jacket, grateful for one more ordinary moment before the truth reached him. Kieran watched the little boy with eyes that had faced countless battles without hesitation, yet now they carried only quiet regret. He slowly lowered himself to one knee so he would meet Noah at eye level. The crowd instinctively stepped back, giving the three of them space. "Hello, Noah," Kieran said gently. "My name is Kieran." Noah studied him with innocent curiosity. "You already helped make sure everyone gave the wolf room to breathe." "Thank you." Kieran smiled faintly. "I think you were the one who helped all of us today." Noah looked pleased by the compliment. Children accepted kindness without suspicion, something adults often forgot how to do. Emily remained silent, carefully watching every expression on her son's face. She had promised herself that if this day ever came, Noah would never be caught between resentment and loyalty. He deserved honesty, not conflict. Kieran looked toward Emily before speaking again. "May I walk with you both for a little while?" Emily hesitated. For years earlier she would have accepted almost anything he asked. Today was different. She was no longer searching for his approval. She was protecting a little boy whose heart mattered more than her own. After several quiet seconds, she answered with calm honesty. "You may walk beside us, but nothing else changes today." Kieran nodded immediately. "That is more than I deserve." They left the crowded square together, following a peaceful path beside the river where colorful autumn leaves floated across the gentle current. Noah skipped ahead, happily pointing out squirrels gathering acorns and ducks gliding across the water. Completely unaware of the emotional distance the two adults were slowly crossing behind him. Finally Kieran broke the silence. "I cannot change what I did." Emily kept her eyes on Noah. "No. But if you allow it, I want to know my son." Emily stopped walking. "Do not make promises because you feel guilty." Kieran met her gaze without looking away. "I am making them because every moment I have already lost cannot be recovered, and I refuse to lose another." Emily searched his face for the proud king who had once chosen duty over love. Instead she found a man who finally understood the cost of that decision. "Noah does not need a perfect father," she said quietly. "He needs someone who shows up tomorrow, and the day after that, and every ordinary day that follows." Kieran nodded. "Then that is where I will begin." Ahead of them, Noah turned with a bright smile and waved excitedly. "Come on. The bridge has the best view of the whole river." Emily watched her son laughing beneath the golden afternoon sun. She realized this journey was no longer about forgiving the past. It was about protecting the future. If Kieran truly wished to become part of Noah's life, he would have to earn that place one simple day at a time, because the greatest acts of love were never spoken beneath royal banners. They were proven quietly through patience, consistency, and the choice to remain present when every ordinary sunrise arrived. The weeks that followed changed the rhythm of 3 lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Kieran never arrived with royal ceremonies or grand announcements. He came quietly, often carrying a simple wooden puzzle, a storybook, or fresh bread from the village bakery. He learned how Noah laughed whenever ducks chased each other across the river, how he always thanked people before leaving, and how every evening he insisted on helping Emily water the small garden behind their cottage. Little by little, trust grew where regret had once lived. Emily never hurried the process. She watched from a distance as father and son built memories that no throne could ever create. One cool autumn morning, Noah looked up at Kieran while they repaired a broken birdhouse together. "Will you come back next week?" he asked with innocent hope. Kieran set down the hammer and smiled warmly. "If you will have me, I will come back. Next week and the week after that and every chance I am given." Noah grinned and threw his arms around him without hesitation. Emily quietly turned toward the garden, blinking away grateful tears. She realized that the promise she had made years ago had been kept. Her son had never questioned whether he was loved. Now, he simply had one more person willing to prove it. Before winter arrived, the royal council gathered once again inside Blackwood Palace. This time, Kieran stood before the elders with complete certainty. The future of this kingdom will not be built upon appearances or political expectations, he declared. It will be built upon truth, family, and the courage to correct my own mistakes. He publicly recognized Noah as his son, not because of ancient traditions or royal blood, but because love required honesty. The announcement spread across every village in the Northern Territories, inspiring admiration instead of scandal. When spring returned, Emily accepted Kieran's invitation to visit the palace, not as someone seeking a crown, but as a woman who knew her own worth. She walked beside him by choice, while Noah raced ahead through the royal gardens, laughing as the little wolf pup, now fully grown, bounded happily beside him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them stood together overlooking the kingdom that had once divided them. Kieran reached for Emily's hand, leaving her every opportunity to refuse. Instead, after a quiet moment, she gently intertwined her fingers with his. It was not destiny that brought them peace at last. It was humility, forgiveness, and the daily decision to love with patience instead of pride. And beneath the rising moon, the family that had once been separated by one painful choice finally walked forward together, proving that true strength is found not in the power to rule, but in the courage to cherish the hearts entrusted to your care.